All right, all right, all right. I think we should be live about now, but I am just going to log in myself and make sure we're good to go, guys. What's up, everybody? Happy Friday night, the 2nd of July, 2021. Hope you're all doing well. Whenever it is that you're watching this, whether you're going to hang out live with us tonight or you're watching on the replay, I appreciate you being here. We're going to talk about frog fishing and go through my frog box tonight, as well as a couple of suggestions, tips, modifications that I have to give to you when it comes to frog fishing. We're here in the month of July, and frog fishing is on pretty much everywhere in the country. And if you don't have a frog tied on pretty much at all times, you are missing out. So we're going to go through my frog box specifically, tell you about kind of all of the frogs that I fish, talk about a few different styles of frogs, and when and where they're most appropriate, and then just talk about kind of the technical basics of frog fishing and what is important to remember or consider when fishing with a hollow body frog. So I'm going to give people just a minute or two to hop in here, and we will talk about frogs. Ron Holly in the house. He says, purple frogs. Dude, I don't know that I have a single purple frog. I don't think so, man. I don't know what to tell you. Kevin the Baitman Baxter, I know, has a pink and purple frog that you would love. That is, it's the OSP, maybe the Drippy frog or something like that. Or it could even just be a JDM color of like one of the jackal frogs. But it's pink and purple, a Japanese specific color. I don't know if they call it morning dawn or what, but we are not going to talk about any pink and purple frogs tonight. I hate to tell you, but yeah, should be a good time. We're going to just kind of run through my frog box, tell you what I like to use and in what situations. I'm going to show you my two setups that I use for frog fishing. I've got them here with me right now with frogs tied on that I've been using as of late. And just give you a couple tips and tricks, modifications to remember and consider when frog fishing. So we'll get into it. You might be the only person in here right now, Ron, but I expect that a few people will jump in over the next 10 or 15 minutes, and hopefully will contribute in the chat. But otherwise, I'm just going to kind of roll through my box. Yeah, man, the Drippy from OSP is a really interesting frog. It's kind of like a build-your-own sprinkler frog type of deal. It comes with separate parts, and it's a really finesse-sized frog. So anyway, I'm just going to kind of run from front to back. So I'm going to start down bottom and work my way back in no particular order. So I'm not going to go through the categories specifically because I've got these frogs organized by brand more than anything. So up front, I've got my Booyahs, my Z-Mans, and my Strike Kings. So we'll talk about those first. And first is really the Booyah Pad Crasher. This is, in a lot of ways, still kind of the industry standard frog on the market. Very cheap and very effective, okay? It's got a very classic design to it. As you can see, I have not trimmed the legs on these frogs, which is pretty much just a sign that I have not fished them yet. The vast majority of these frogs that you will see already have their legs trimmed, which is a main thing that I do before fishing a hollow body frog. So this is the standard Pad Crasher that is a walking style frog. As you can see, it's got a nice soft body. It does have a relatively small hook, but it's a good one nonetheless. So If you were having issues with hookup ratio, of course, you could bend those hooks up or better yet out to increase your hookup ratio. But I still don't do that very often. The Poppin' Pad Crasher is the other version with a cupped mouth on it. Same exact, soft collapsible body, slightly bigger hook on this guy, but great bait as well. Just hooked myself on the 6 cents Axis sitting here on my table. I'm going to try not to make too much of a mess. I'm going to try and put these back as I go. But I'm going to just leave 2 of these aside to talk about modifications later. Now, I did want to talk about the Z-Man Leapfrogs, since one of the guys on last night's stream brought it up, and I've got it here in the same section of my box as the Pad Crasher. Ryan Dyke in the house, man. What's up, dude? How are you doing? Thank you so much for being here. Good to see you. I'm doing well. Thank you very much. I've got 4 of the Z-Man Leapfrogs. I've got 2 in the bigger size. So this is the standard Leapfrogs, and this is the Poppin' Leapfrogs. I will just show you right now. Look at how soft this body is. I mean, even the belly is extremely soft. Just the entire thing does not require much force at all to compress and set the hook. The skirt legs are fantastic material. If you guys didn't know, Z-Man was originally started making skirting material before they started making baits at all. So anyway, that's why you'll notice that there's skirts on all of their jigs, as well as the skirts that they sell. The skirts on their frogs are all top quality. So as you can see, the belly of this frog is very keeled. So it's going to make for easy walking, and it's going to make this frog just a little bit better for open water fishing. A frog with a flatter belly is going to do better on top of mats or heavier vegetation, because when you're fishing a frog like this on heavy vegetation, it's going to want to roll to its side a little bit, which is going to expose this lower hook and run just a little bit more of a risk of that hook catching on the vegetation that you're fishing over the top of. Now, like I mentioned last night when this frog was brought up, this frog is designed around this hook, which is a nice, relatively large hook, but it stays pretty dang weedless straight out of the package. So I do really like that. I've got this frog in the junior size as well. As you can tell, I'm pretty simple when it comes to colors. White bellies and yellow or green bellies are kind of my main 2 go-tos, but I also throw black. And that's pretty much it when it comes to frogs. I've noticed that the small frog has just a little bit stiffer of a body. And one thing, like I mentioned last night, that has been a little bit frustrating is that, I think this is the one right here. If you take a look at the belly of this frog, where the hook goes into the actual frog itself, it's already torn here. So I'm going to need to glue this together to kind of fix it. That is something that will happen over time with your frogs, is that the bodies will rip, and it's just part of the game, right? I mean, frogs are not the most durable baits. So you're not going to get them hung up and lose them to snags like you would with other baits, but they will rip. Sometimes frogs will last you a good 20 or even 50 fish. or if you're really good at frog fishing and you know how to preserve the life of a frog, um, it could last longer than that. But sometimes you'll run into the unfortunate issue where a frog might only last you a couple of fish or a couple of blow-ups, and that can be really frustrating, especially if you're spending just a little bit more money on the frogs that you're fishing with. So next up on the list are the Strike King frogs, okay? This first one is the Strike King Sexy Frog, I believe it's called, and I've got it in 4 colors. So I've really got my bases entirely covered here. I've got a white belly. This is a like a sexy shad type of pattern. It's got a ton of glitter in it. Absolutely love this color pattern. I've got a standard black. You'll see this color pattern a lot with Spro and Strike King and Booyah. That kind of black and yellow frog. Then I've got more of a tree frog type of pattern with a green back and a yellow belly. Really like that. And then lastly, just a little bit more natural to imitate a bluegill in, say, clearer water if you're fishing on edges of grass, is just a standard green pumpkin frog. So one thing that I really like about this frog and use it for is that it's a multi-purpose frog. So like I mentioned a few minutes ago, this frog has a little bit flatter of a profile. So I will fish this on top of mats and heavier vegetation, not just on the edges. And then one thing to aid with that is that this frog often comes with a rattle on the inside. So if you're shopping for this thing in stores, that's one thing to look out for. This one doesn't have it. This one does have it. It does not say on the package whether the frog comes with a rattle inside or not. So that can be a little bit frustrating if that's one thing that you really want. Is that sometimes you might not get it. So what I do is go into the store and actually shake the package or even open up the package and shake it to see if there's a rattle inside. So awesome, Ryan. Glad to hear that you are chilling at the lake house to celebrate the holiday. Actually, you live in Canada, don't you? So you don't celebrate the 4th of July. Okay, next up, they don't make a poppin' version of that sexy frog from Strike King, but one frog that I do like is the poppin' Pad Perch from Strike King. So this is a different type of frog. It's got a slightly more streamlined profile. It definitely looks more like a bait fish. So this thing looks like a perch, and it's colored on both sides of the bait. So if you're fishing in more open water, it will kind of look like a fish when the fish are looking up at it. It will look like a dying bait fish from below. So pretty cool design there. And then it's got this unique tail to it that is a tapered skirting material that goes all the way across. So just a little bit different. I do like the frog though. Very soft, very good action to it. And this is one of the few frogs that I do have in a totally nude, clear color pattern that I will fish in clear water to imitate a shad. Okay? Next row, this might be my favorite row, but let's talk about JDM frogs first. Canada Day was July 1st, he said. Okay, so you were celebrating the holiday up at the lake house. You said in the heat wave right now, it's been 100 degrees the last week. Interesting that you're talking in Fahrenheit. Would you normally talk, refer to temperature in Celsius or what? And what does that equate to? High 30s or what? Anyway, JDM frogs. There's a couple that I want to talk about. First, again, is new to me. This is one that we talked about last night. One that is in my giveaway that is running for the next 2 days. And this is the Megabass Big Gavit or Big Gabot frog. And this is quite possibly the largest frog that I own. Sitting here right at 3 inches and change and 3/4 of an ounce. This is designed to be more of a poppin' style frog, but can be fished in a variety of situations, of course. So cool frog there, but expensive. Same with this one. This is the evergreen soft shell frog. Okay. What's cool about this one is 2 features. One, it has the shower blows nose to it. So this thing is going to make for an awesome walking and popping style frog in more open water. And to couple with that is the tail. This is made from a like zonkers rabbit tail, and so this fur is just going to give it quite a bit more natural movement in the water. Very, very cool. I'm not sure if it's made to imitate a different animal than a frog, but that's beside the point. This is a relatively large and long profile, kind of like the Megabass frog. You'll see that the hook is molded into the weight of this frog. And so like you get out of the shower blows, it is tail weighted and is going to sit tail down in the water until you start walking this thing. It is going to walk in place better than most frogs. So it's got a soft collapsible body, long hook on it. Very good frog, but relatively expensive and hard to get your hands on. While we're still in the realm of JDM, but going to very popular and fairly inexpensive are the frogs from Jackal. So first is the Jackal Gavacho frog. Here I've got 2 of them in bluegill patterns. One with a black belly, one with more of like a, transparent whitish belly. I think this is called chartreuse gill because it's got a chartreuse back on it. Just like other topwater baits, I do like being able to see my bait from further away. And that, while we're on the topic of seeing your frog, I will give one of my tips right now and mention that on one of my setups, I do use Highviz braid. Okay? A lot of people might not consider doing this when frog fishing, is throwing neon green or Highviz braid, because it seems a little strange. Most people would throw Highviz braid on spinning setups. And when they're throwing braid on bait casters, they're typically going to go for a moss green or a black or something just a little bit more natural. However, seeing the frog, seeing the bite, seeing what is happening is crucial to setting the hook and landing fish when frog fishing. So, like I mentioned, I like to be able to see the frog when I'm fishing, especially if I'm making longer casts, but sometimes you don't always see the bite. The fish don't always come clear out of the water to eat the frog. They will sometimes just suck it down, and all of a sudden, as you're walking that thing or twitching it, it just won't be there anymore. So the advantage to using Highviz braid is that you will visibly be able to see which way the fish is going with your frog. A lot of people will mention, and I will also suggest this, that when setting the hook on a frog, it is key to wait a second or two after the fish blows up. You need to give them a chance to get it down, not necessarily in their crusher, but to get the entire bait. Sometimes they don't even get it at all. So setting the hook too early is always a bad idea. So a lot of people might say wait until you feel some weight, just kind of reel down and feel for whether the fish is there. I don't always do that. I just kind of count, you know, to 2 or so. Once I see the fish take the frog, I'm going to reel down 1, 2, and set the hook on them. So it really helps when you don't see them eat the frog, or when you do, to see what direction they swim off with the bait. Because oftentimes you don't want to set the hook in the same direction and increase the odds of pulling the frog straight out of the fish's mouth. So you want to be able to set the hook in the right direction. Okay, just a little bit of a tip there, and a reason that I use Highviz braid on one of my 2 frogging setups. So the Jackal Gavacho is a $10 frog, very high quality, well-made frog. It does have a slightly stiffer body, but as you can see, the hooks are already turned up and out. Very, very cool design there. Even though it's not the softest body, it is easy to compress, and the hookup ratio is pretty good. The color patterns on this thing are fantastic. The popping action is great. You can fish this thing almost in any situation, and they're pretty affordable and relatively easy to get your hands on. The other one by Jackal, which unfortunately is not as easy to get your hands on, is the small Jackal Cara or Kyera, depending on how you pronounce that. This guy also costs just 10 bucks, but is much smaller in profile. I'll show you side by side here. The Cara is like a true finesse frog, okay? So this thing is wicked. It's got just a little bit softer of a body, but this is a walking style frog. Better to be fished on the edges of stuff or in open water. But again, it does have a flat enough body on the belly that it could be fished over the top of stuff. The only issue is it's not going to make much of a commotion. So if you're fishing, you know, on mats or in really heavy cover, it helps to have a heavier weight frog, something with a rattle in it, something that's going to press down on the mat, make a little bit more of a commotion, and get those fish's attention. Something like the Cara is not going to do that. So anyway, $10 frog, very, very high quality. Jackal Gavacho, Jackal Cara, highly recommend both frogs. And you'll hear the same from most bass fishermen who are recommending baits. The evergreen soft shell is one that you will not hear much about. And if you can get your hands on, I would definitely recommend it. It's just different than kind of everything else out there, okay? Moving right along, because I know I just took a little while talking about those, but I did mention a couple of the tips and tricks that I wanted to mention throughout the course of this video. So Ryan says it was 38 degrees today, 10:24 p.m. right now, and it's still 32. Dang, dude, that is hot. Insane. Okay, next up is the Scum Frog Trophy Series of frogs. This is a new frog on the market, pretty cheap and very high quality. First impressions are very good. Only thing about this that I'm not a huge fan of is the hole in the back of the frog. It's pretty wide open, as you see, right in front of the weight. So it is theoretically going to let in just a little bit more water than most frogs. You will have to squeeze out the water just a little bit more frequently, but this frog walks well. It is super soft. So hook set ratio is fantastic, and the hooks are already turned up. So Scum Frog is a great brand, one that I don't actually own a ton of, but saw that trophy series recently and saw the $7 price tag, decided that I needed a couple. The next frog that I have a lot of and like to throw very frequently is the live target. It used to be the coppers. I'm not quite sure the relationship between coppers and live target, but this is the live target hollow belly frog. Extremely soft body. Some people would complain about durability on this frog, and I'm not going to argue that necessarily, especially for the $12 or $13 price tag that it has. But when it comes to fishability, realism, and quality overall, this thing is really tough to beat. So it's got great hooks on it, great design, great color patterns, and you can even see on the side of the body, they've got a textured design here that looks like, a toad itself. They've got the legs that are tucked in like a frog that would be swimming. It is just a gorgeous looking frog and a very effective frog to fish. So I do have it in all three sizes. That big one, I don't fish all that frequently unless they're on bluegill or on big bait. But otherwise, this middle size is what I fish most frequently. And every now and again, when I'm fishing ponds, I will go and downsize to this tiny little frog. Just super cute and also very effective when they're feeding on small bait, or if you see little frogs around, or if you're fishing around small bass for that matter, and they might not be able to get a standard size frog in their mouth. So something to consider there. And that's just another one of my suggestions or topics that I want to talk about is the concept of finesse frogs. I mentioned that Jackal Cara. There are a couple of others that I throw that are in that size profile. Here's the Spro in, I want to say it's the 55 size. Here's the live target, which might even be like a 45 or a 50. So all very small frogs. And then the Booyah Toad Runner Jr., which is the same body as the Pad Crasher Jr., which I just don't happen to have any of at the moment, but that would be another one that falls into the same category as that Pad Crasher Jr. So there is a time and a place for a junior sized or a small frog, and I do recommend it. Okay, next up is the 6th Sense Vega frog. This is a new frog on the market in the last year or so. I do have one tied on my other setup that I didn't show you yet. So I've got kind of one in every color pattern that I think is important. This one is called Frogville. It is a very natural green pumpkin back and just kind of a brighter green belly. The other two colors that I've got are the white ivory and the black magic. You guys know me by now and know that the black magic color is perhaps my favorite color of all that 6th Sense makes. But this frog, I've been fishing in the past week or so and have found that it walks incredibly easily, especially for a popping frog, and I am very impressed with it. Now, the hooks are turned up quite a bit, so if you see, my finger catches on it every single time. While the frog was designed around this hook, they made it so that this hook is already up and out just a little bit. And so it's going to be less weedless than other frogs on the market. It does have a nice long profile, which aids in its walkability, as do the legs. But so far, very impressed. Again, that bait is going to fit into the same category as like the live target for me. Price-wise, they're about the same. And quality-wise, they're about the same. I mean, upper echelon. Very, very impressed. So, in my opinion, worth the 12 or 13 bucks that they cost. Okay. Next up is the ever popular and super effective Spro bronze-eye frog. Now, I prefer to throw the middle size most often, and I prefer to throw it in the poppin' version most often. That said, I do have a couple in the junior size. You know, the standard size to me is almost just like any other frog, okay? One thing that's unfortunate about the Spro frogs is that the bodies can be a little bit inconsistent in terms of how soft they are. So every now and again you will find one that you purchase that has a stiffer body than would be ideal. And so you do need to boil the bodies to soften them up a bit, okay? Just one little tip there. But the bronze-eye poppin' frog is, you know, one of my just long-time favorite frogs overall. These two colors here are awesome. This one is called Freak. It's got that chartreuse cupped mouth and just kind of a variety of colors on it. Kind of a yellow side and it transitions to a white on the belly. And then this one is called Killer Gill, and it's more of a greenback and like a bluegill pattern that fades to a silver belly on it. So, in general, I find that I have a lot fewer issues with the pop-in version of this frog in terms of consistency of that belly. But the big pros to Spro frogs are quality and price, right? So kind of like those jackal frogs, you're getting a really high quality frog for not a premium price tag. So it's right in that $10 range, I want to say. Sometimes maybe even a little bit cheaper, but you are going to get a Gamakatsu hook that is designed really well around the frog. So this thing is going to stay very weedless until you set the hook. But then that collapsible body is going to allow for a very high hookup ratio, which is crucial. Okay, next up is a bait that that I don't have a ton of experience with, but I've heard very, very good things about. And these are the Terminator frogs, okay? Here, these are both the junior size. This is the walking, this is the popping. Very high quality frogs, okay? Soft body, great color patterns. They walk very well. Only thing is the hook relative to the frog is a little bit small and a little bit needing to be altered, in my opinion. So this is another one of the things that I wanted to talk about in this video, was just that sometimes frogs come in a way that they need to be altered, at least when it comes to the hooks. So what I will do with a frog like this, especially if I'm fishing it straight out of the package, after I've trimmed the skirt up a little bit, and I'm having blow-ups but not catching fish, is that I will bend these hooks. And I will first bend them out slightly before I bend them up. Because when you think about it, when you set the hook on a frog, the body is going to come out of the hook and roll away. So what you're left with is this hook right here. And you can tell that on this junior size, the hook is relatively small. And it's like an EWG style. These hooks are not turned up or out at all. And so when the fish bites, what you're going to come into first is not just a straight compressing of the frog, but oftentimes they'll come at it from the side. They'll eat it and you'll compress one side or the other, and you'll catch that first hook point in the fish before you're not going to get penetration on both hooks right away the majority of the time. So I will bend the hooks out ever so slightly before I bend them up. Okay? Riley in the house. What's up, yo? Late night for you, late night for me. Thank you for tuning in, at least for a little bit. I didn't see Justin in here. Is Justin in here? All I know about in terms of people who are contributing in the chat are Ryan and Ron. Ron, that's a good question. Not necessarily, okay? It can, for sure, if you're fiddling around with it too much, but usually frogs are going to have a very heavy gauged wire hook. So no. Take your pliers, grab hard, and bend out, okay? Should not have an issue with it creating a weak point in the hook. But one thing that is important to note is that you do your bending close to the bend of the hook, where the shank meets the bend, and not so close to the barb of the hook, because if you accidentally pinch down the barb on your hooks, that can be a big no-no, right? Frog fishing is something where more than any other type of fishing, you really want those barbs to do work for you. So I never try to mess with the barbs on the hooks of the frogs that I'm fishing, all right? Now, last section of my box, last category that I want to talk about are prop style frogs. And actually, before I get there, there's one other frog that's sitting in this last section. And this is the Reaction Innovations Swamp Donkey frog, which is a very high quality frog. You know, it's the exact same thing as the Teckle. Oh, someone's got to help me out. Maybe it's called the choker frog. I'm not quite sure what they call it. But this is one that I hadn't fished until this year. I thought that this frog was discontinued, and it may or may not have been. I'm not totally sure. But the Reaction Innovations Swamp Donkey, very good frog. Walks easily, collapses easily, and is affordable. So I like the way that this frog looks, feels, and fishes, and it's exactly the same as the one from Teckle. That is just their standard frog. Teckle makes a bunch of one-off, different type of frogs. You know, the first one that I'll talk about, and really the only one that I own at the moment, is the Teckle Sprinkler frog. Okay, I've got a handful of these, and it's a good bait for sure. This is a paddle tail spin frog. Okay, I'm sure everybody knows about this frog by now, but instead of a skirt, this thing has just one single hole in the back with a swivel built into it. They put a split ring on the back and then a screw lock with a paddle tail like you'd see on the back of a swim bait. and rigged it straight on there. In the package comes a spare tail for you. Um, and this is just a really cool design. So as you can see, same exact body as that swamp donkey that I showed you, or the standard frog that Teckle makes, but with a different design on the back. Instead of two legs coming out, it's just the one tail. So this thing is essentially a weedless whopper plopper. Very cool bait. It was all the rage a few years ago, and very difficult to get your hands on. Now, it's still very popular, but not nearly as difficult to acquire. They're in stock most places, very easy to get a hold of, but they are relatively expensive. These are like 15 to 17 bucks. I'm not quite sure. Great hooks that are turned up, and they're also turned out. So one thing that you will run into, depending on the frog that you get, is that sometimes these hooks will just be totally away from the body. Like this one, for example, this bone-colored one that I've got. I don't know if you guys can tell, but there is a clear gap between the hook and the body. And that, in my opinion, is a little bit annoying. Because like I mentioned earlier, if you're fishing this through some thick stuff and then out into the open as you get closer to where you are, this thing is occasionally going to roll a little bit. And those hooks can easily catch on vegetation, and you're going to have a difficult time where you are more frequently pulling weeds or grass off of your frog, which is just annoying. So there is some inconsistency in these frogs. Even though theoretically they all have the same hook, you would think some of them come quite a bit more weedless than others. But like I said, the hooks are already turned up and out. So kind of checks the boxes straight out of the package, and I'm a fan. Now, like I mentioned earlier, next up is the Booyah Toad Runner. Same design, really came from, was inspired by the Sprinkler Frog, but this is the Booyah Pad Crasher body with the exact same design as the Sprinkler Frog. So what they've done is added a hole in the back. They've cut these, they've made more finessey legs than the standard Pad Crasher. They've made them thinner, and they've cut them down super short, and then they've added a hole in the middle of the back. Just like the Sprinkler, they've put a high quality swivel on there, and a split ring, and their own unique take on a tail. So this tail is unique in that it has a wire running through it. Okay? So you can bend this tail. It comes out of the package just kind of straight at almost a 90-degree angle. But check this out. It's going to have a standard plopping frequency like that. You can bend this thing up, and so then it's going to have a more subtle action, and it's going to be quieter in how it kicks. Or vice versa. You can bend this thing down, and it's going to be much louder in the noise that it makes. So I absolutely love that design in the Toad Runner. It comes in two sizes, unlike the Sprinkler. So you get that larger version, and you get a junior. The junior is wicked for fishing in ponds or around small bait. So I'm a big fan of the Toad Runner Junior in particular, and do highly recommend it. It's quite a bit cheaper than you'd get out of the Sprinkler Frog. I want to say the Toad Runner runs for about 9 or 10 bucks, and in my opinion, it's worth it. Ron says the Maraca Frog. It might be. They've got like 3 or 4 frogs. I do not have any of the other Teckle frogs that have blades instead of silicone legs. So we're not going to talk about those tonight, but I do think that those are unique and worth giving a look for sure. In fact, I'm considering picking up one or two, but there's a modification that I'm going to show you here in a couple of minutes. Last frog that is in my box currently that I do fish and want to talk about, that I've got a few of, is the Lunker Hunt prop frog. Okay, Lunker Hunt makes a few different frogs, actually a bunch of frogs, and they're fairly well made. Very collapsible, soft body, great realism. Kind of reminds me almost of the Live Target, but they're cheaper. And as a lot of people would associate with the brand that is Lunker Hunt, some of them are more gimmicky than others. And so, you know, I don't throw the Yappa line of frogs. And I've found that the prop fish frogs, I don't get quite as good of a hookup ratio. But what makes this bait so cool is that it has two legs that look like frog legs that rotate independently. So it's kind of like a double plopper type of deal. And because those legs are stiff and pointed outward, what they've been able to do is rig a stinger hook on the back of this frog. So I rarely fish with a trailer hook on my frogs. I do have trailer hooks for frogs and have tried it some. But I find that, you know, it often causes more hassle than is necessary. But same issue that you'd have with a whopper plopper, where there is a joint in these legs, grass will catch, okay? So you cannot fish this thing in grass because they will foul up and the legs will stop turning for you. So you really need to fish this thing in open water. But it's a very cool bait and does have a great hookup ratio because they will oftentimes come at it from behind and get that trailer hook. So cool action, good frog at a good price. I've got 3 of them in my box right now. I've caught a decent amount of fish on them and do recommend them. Okay. And that makes up my box of frogs in terms of what I've got loaded up right now. It's not necessarily every frog that I own, but it's what I keep in my box and what I fish with. Now, Cool Granddaddy Sweets Forever. Dude, you are in here again. I really appreciate it. You say, man, I'm so glad I found your channel. You explain to where I have an idea of what to do, even though I didn't know all the terminology. All my life, 60 years, but never bass, and now I have the fever. I hear you, man, for sure. And I'm glad you found me as well. Thank you so much for being in here. I am accessible. Feel free to ask questions whenever you have them, whether it's in a live video, leaving a comment on a previous video, or sending me an email. You can contact me at hooksetsorfree18@gmail.com, or you can follow me on Instagram. Hit me up in the direct messages there. Always happy to chat and answer any questions you might have. Okay, a modification that I do make occasionally is changing the legs out on frogs. So here I've taken the Booyah Pad Crasher. Like I mentioned, very cheap and high quality frog. One of the most accessible frogs on the market. And I've removed the legs and thrown in some Spro power swivels. I've glued those in here, added some Spro split rings, stainless steel split rings, and the Owner CPS centering pin springs, okay? So then I've screwed on just the tail section of a Zoom Ultra Vibe speed worm on each leg. You could put on whatever you want. Paddle tails, straight tails, anything. It literally just screws on here. So for the sake of demonstration, I will take one of these off and show you what it looks like. I don't know if you guys utilize the CPS spring or not, but you need to. You can use them on soft plastic baits of all kinds. I use them on a fluke, is probably the best example, so that you could actually screw one of these springs into the nose of a fluke and then nose hook with a wacky rig or drop shot style hook. The Owner Mosquito is really my favorite, and you can nose hook a fluke right through the eye of that centering pin, and it's not going to tear the nose of the bait up. So very cool little trick. The centering pin springs were designed more for swim bait hooks. They come stock on the Owner Beast and Owner Flashy Swimmers. But there's a lot of applications that you can use them for. Now, the other thing that I would do is the exact same thing, you know, putting a swivel and a split ring on, but then adding a couple of spinnerbait blades. This came off of, you know, like a, I don't know if it was a spinnerbait or if it was one of those like faux umbrella rigs, but this essentially creates the same thing that the Teckle frogs have been doing, which is going to weigh the frog down quite a bit. So it's going to sit tail down. It won't quite sink, but it is going to weight the frog down a lot more than it would without all of this hardware on the back. So I am going to swim this bait primarily, but I will occasionally kill it. It will make a little bit of a noise as these blades hit each other. If you're walking the bait, they will hit each other. So cool little modification that you can make out of really most frogs on the market. But I prefer to do that to frogs that that are cheaper and whose legs do not go straight out, but rather are a little bit closer to in line with the body. So that is pretty much all the info that I had for you. The last piece of info and tip or trick that I would give to you, this is not a trick so much as a tip. If you're frog fishing, what you will find is that the amount of blow-ups or bites that you get compared to how many fish you land is going to feel disappointing relative to other lures that you would fish. So it's just part of the game, right? They don't always get it. You don't always set the hook just right. You're going to have those issues. So one thing that is absolutely crucial, especially if they are not eating the bait very, very well, is having a follow-up bait. Usually a soft plastic like a Senko or something of the sort that is going to be more of a dead action, slow fall, just something you can put right in the area. If a fish blows up on a frog, they're going to create a hole in whatever you're fishing. You're going to be able to see where they came from, and they won't always follow up on the frog itself. So if you did not ruin the cast and just fling your frog behind you or in your own face, if you were able to see them miss the frog or you barely set the hook and it didn't travel very far, I would continue working that same retrieve to try and get that same fish to come back and eat it again, because that will happen from time to time. Not a very high percentage of the time, but it will happen. Now, if you did ruin the cast, or if they're not coming back for that same bait, what you can do is set the frog rod down, grab your stick bait setup, and pitch a little weightless rig into that same exact spot where the fish blew up, and oftentimes they will eat that follow-up bait. So keep that in mind. Do that. Give it a shot. Let me know what you think. Let me know what you guys think of all the information that I just gave you over the last, I don't know, almost an hour or so. I've got to run here shortly. It is 11:03 my time. Love hanging out with you guys. The chat was not as active tonight, but I'm glad I was able to kind of roll through my presentation, given that there was a lot to cover. Again, the main things that I wanted to talk about were having that follow-up bait, trimming the legs on your frog, just because a lot of times, like I said, frogs will come up from behind. So if you've got too long of legs, it can lead to them eating the bait legs first, legs only, and not getting the entire thing in their mouth. And the other thing that it can do is mess up your ability to work the frog. So I don't know why so many frogs come in the package with super long legs, but I almost always trim mine down. And my general rule of thumb is that I will pull those legs up and measure them so that they are essentially as long as the body of the frog is. Sometimes I'll play around with that and go just a little bit longer than the line tie. Sometimes I will go a little bit shorter than the nose of the frog. But for the most part, that is my rule of thumb in terms of trimming the legs. But I do recommend always trimming your legs. If you've got a frog that does not walk easily, which walking a frog is pretty easy to figure out just by, small taps of the rod tip, okay? One thing that you can do is trim one leg shorter than the other on your frog. And it's going to make the frog walk to one side quite a bit easier. So it's going to just generally make your frog walk easier. And like I mentioned, bending out the hooks on your frog can be crucial sometimes. You really need to pay attention to that and the conditions that you're fishing. I do not do that on all of my frogs, and in fact, most of the time I do not. It's more of a situational thing. If I've only got one or two frogs on me and I'm having issues where fish are eating the bait, but I am missing a lot of those fish, then I will go ahead and do that, especially on something like a Booyah Pad Crasher or a Spro Bronzeye, where the body is built really well around those hooks and it is extremely weedless by itself. Those frogs do not have huge hookup ratio issues, but sometimes you'll run into that. Sometimes it's more human error than the frog itself, but you can increase your odds by bending the hooks. And the last thing that I wanted to mention, like I said, was gear. Consider trying Highviz braid on your frog setup. When it comes to the specs of my setups, I like a long rod that is heavy power, fast action, and a high speed reel. That's really all you need to know. I think both of mine are, this is a 7.4 heavy, extra fast, Quantum Smoke. This is a new rod to me. Ron knows about it. I tried to recommend this deal to him. It was on sale from $160 down to $100 at Sportsman's Warehouse not too long ago. And so this is a new frog rod for me. I'll also use it for flipping, pitching, punching. And then I've got a matching Quantum Smoke S3 reel on here with 65-pound braid. This is the Power Pro V2 Slick in the Highviz green. And then on this setup, I'm using a little bit cheaper of a rod. This is the Lew's Carbon Fire Speed Stick, which is like an $80 rod. I got it on sale for, I don't know, 60 bucks a year, no, almost 3 years ago actually. And this has been a killer rod for me for multiple applications. I've used this for swim jigs. I've used it for heavier Texas rigs. I've used it for frogging. I've used it for heavier chatterbaits and bigger jigs. This has been kind of my go-to heavy power rod for years now, but it's 7.3 heavy, fast action. And then with it, I've got a Lew's, what do they call this? It's not the TP1 because that's the rod. This is the custom black reel. What's important in a reel is mostly just that it's got a high-speed gear ratio. The other thing that's relatively important is that it's got a high amount of drag power to it. So torque is one thing that's crucial, because once you set the hook on a frog, you do not want to play them whatsoever. You will way too often lose a fish that gets down in the thick stuff and gets off, or that you have to winch in somehow with 50 pounds of grass on it. So that is not something that you want to deal with. Once you set the hook on a frog, you just want to just bring them in as fast as you can. Force that fish in to where you are. So having a reel with a high amount of drag, in this case, the custom black from Lew's has like 20 pounds of drag, is important. So I use, on this one, yeah, I'm using also, I think, 65-pound braid. You could go as low as 50-pound braid, or as high as 80 if you wanted to, but really I find that 65 is kind of that in-between where I can still make a reasonably decent cast, but I can rip through grass as thick as can be, where I don't need heavier braid. If I go up to 80, then it's going to result in shorter casts. It's really just more of an issue. You can't fit as much line on your reel. You can't cast as far. If you go down to 40-pound braid, you could cast a lot further, but you run the risk of breaking off, and you also run the risk of backlashing a lot easier, and of fish getting down and burying you in the weeds, in the grass. So I like to stay right in that, sometimes 50, but usually 65-pound braid, and that is really just what I do. So no problem, Granddaddy. What's your name, by the way, man? I'd like to be able to call you guys by name. So you notice that Bassless Chap I call Ron, because that's his real name. What is your first name? You're newer to the channel. You've been in the last 2 lives and contributing in the chat, which we all super appreciate. It helps the conversation going, and it's always nice to know that somebody is enjoying the content and appreciates being here. Your name is Abe. Okay, I should be able to remember that, but please forgive me if I don't next time we're on and you jump in the chat. But pleasure to meet you, Abe. My name is Tyler, and yeah, good hanging out with you guys tonight. I'm gonna dip out of here. Super fun talking about frogs. If you've got any questions, like I said, leave a comment, email me, hit me up on Instagram, whatever you want. Happy to chat about kind of anything and everything whenever. You know, while this channel is growing, it's growing slowly. It's still pretty small. And like I said, I'm accessible. Happy to chat. So thank you guys for hanging out. Have a great rest of your Friday night. Enjoy your weekend if I don't see you again. Happy 4th of July. To all of those of you who are Americans, happy Canada Day yesterday to Ryan and all the Canadians. And I will see you guys again soon. Cheers. Peace out, guys.